Welcome back to the North Star Takes podcast. I'm Bailey Paulicki. He's Jacob Liberta. If you're a Minnesota sports fan or Minnesota Vikings fan specifically, please give this video a like and hit the subscribe button on the channel. Today we're going to be talking some very interesting Vikings news is starting to circulate here late Saturday evening as the Minnesota Vikings are supposedly, apparently, according to a few sources, going to interview Jim Harbaugh. Now, some sources are saying that the interview has already taken place as of when we're recording this at about 8 o'clock Saturday night. But basically, people from all sides of it, Vikings reporters included now, have basically confirmed that Jim Harbaugh is at least going to interview with the Minnesota Vikings. And according to some people as well, it sounds like the interest is, really coming from his side of it, maybe more so even than the Vikings side. So what are your thoughts on this initially? I know we've talked about Harbaugh, like we've kind of glossed over him a little bit in our previous videos talking about coaching candidates, but all of a sudden this is becoming a real possibility here.
Yeah, I'm conflicted about this because on the one hand, if you want to look at the positives Harbaugh could bring to the organization, he has a solid NFL track record because he spent, I think it was 4 or 5 seasons. I want to say it was 4 in San Francisco, and he compiled a 44-19-1 record, so that's very solid. In his first 3 years, he flipped a team that was like, I think it was 6-10, I heard. That last year before he was there into an NFC Championship team. They went to the NFC Championship game 3 years in a row, and they had gone to the Super Bowl, and they almost won that one against the Ravens back in 2012 with Kaepernick. So I think he certainly got some got the chops to be an NFL coach. It's just is that style of it, or his style of coaching more for back then than it is now? Is he too close to Zimmer? And that's kind of what leads me into my dislikes of a potential hire here, is that I think he's a little bit too much like Zim, but at the same time, it's like I don't know, do the pros outweigh the cons as far as this guy being a proven coach, and especially if he has a great working relationship with Kwesi, like if he's a really good friend of his or something, and they talk a lot more than anybody even knows, then I'm all for it because I want that GM and head coach relationship to be strong, and then I think we can really build a contender here. So it's tearing me apart, but I think I can find a way to get excited about it if this indeed is the move. How about you, Bailey?
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I still don't think he'd be my preferred choice just because of what you mentioned. I mean, he's 58 years old, roughly.
Yeah.
Roughly the same age that Zimmer was when we hired him. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I know he's an offensive guy and he's got a good, track record of coaching in the NFL. But part of me thinks that this move would signal that the Vikings are going to try and win next season, which would then signal to me that Kirk Cousins is probably sticking around. And obviously you and I have discussed this at length, that we would like to move on, open up more cap space, be able to fill the other holes, because this team's got a ton of holes still. I mean, you got basically holes all over the defense. Offensive line still needs a couple pieces. It'd be interesting. Don't get me wrong. And he's a huge name, and it would bring, a ton of excitement to the fan base to get, one of the hottest coaching names on the market.
Yeah.
A guy who's obviously he's an interesting guy. He's entertaining, but he's kind of weird at the same time.
He's quirky. Yeah,
he's very quirky. And like you said, I don't know if his coaching style would mesh with today's players.
I know.
I feel like, I don't know. To me, what it really comes down to is making Justin Jefferson happy. Like, that's obviously like one of the most important things as it comes to this franchise. Mm-hmm. And if you can get Harbaugh to get Jefferson to buy in completely into his system and what he wants to run and what he envisions for this team, then maybe I'm okay with it. But if the Harbaugh thing turns into a disaster within 2 or 3 seasons, well, that lines up with Jefferson's contract ending, and then all of a sudden maybe he's gone, So it's very worrisome for me. But at the same time, obviously that coaching experience, being to the NFC Championship three years in a row, and some of the stuff I'm seeing floating out on Twitter too. Obviously, this is just Vikings Twitter talking through it, but a lot of people are saying that there's been comparisons made between Kellen Mond and Colin Kaepernick in terms of their build, their athleticism. Even, Kellen Mond's got a pretty strong arm as well. So I just think that it's kind of interesting that if Kellen Mond becomes a similar prototype to Colin Kaepernick, that, well, maybe there's something there that Jim Harbaugh can work with, and maybe he can fix what Mike Zimmer thought was wrong with Kellen Mond. So there's stuff all over the board there, and maybe that's a long shot, but it's kind of intriguing as well that Kellen Mond could maybe fit that Kaepernick prototype.
Yeah, I know, right? I think that's a great point to bring up. It just depends, like how much people in the Vikings building, these new leaders coming in, feel about him. Like his intangibles are obviously there, but do they think he can really play in the NFL? Bottom line, and I think that's a decision you have to make quickly. I'd say, and then if you don't feel like that's a viable option, then obviously there's the draft, whether it be this year, or next year, and
Yeah.
I think with Harbaugh too, I think that's another thing to think about is how much you trust him and be able to develop a quarterback, whether that be Mond or whoever. I think Harbaugh, like we keep going on. He's an acquired taste, so
Yep.
obviously he would have to work closely with uh, Mensa in defending or identifying the next quarterback of this franchise that feels like they can really work well together, and then you can it's basically starting at the top of a championship team, and then you can work your way through the rest of it, and that would play into keeping Jefferson happy. But at the same time, I also want to have a or err on the side of caution and getting too bought into this for just a second, because I know this is kind of straying off the path of development quarterbacks and whatnot, but I was thinking about it, and I want to bring this up that it's also possible Harbaugh to Minnesota is also, or supposed interest in Minnesota is related to maybe some leverage with the University of Michigan. I
Yeah.
think I think it's possible that if, the more he appears to have interest in going into the NFL, the more he thinks that Michigan might come to him and just basically back with the Brinks truck and give him all the cash in the world and get him to stick around. So
Yeah.
I think that's definitely on the table too. But there's so much to sort out here. All we're really trusting right now is rumors, and there's
Hmm.
some credible sources putting their name to this. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I don't know how much it's really materialized or not. But I think that's also something worth considering.
So, I mean, how do you feel about him in terms of like the other candidates that have been deemed more reasonable? Like Raheem Morris has been brought up, a lot. Kevin
Mhm.
O'Connell obviously is. There's reports he was super impressive in his interview, and he's a name to watch for. Um, D'Amico Ryans from the 49ers, like all these younger, up and coming, or in Raheem Morris's case, he's still younger, but he's been a head coach a couple different times, at least as an interim with the Falcons and then back with the Buccaneers as well.
Mhm.
So where does Harbaugh rank for you in terms of those names? Because you and I have repeatedly said Byron Leftwich is probably our number one option, but it's becoming pretty evident, I think, now that we're just not going to interview him. So I'm guessing that possibility is out the window, which is super unfortunate, I think. But where does Harbaugh rank for you in terms of basically everybody else that's been discussed about with the Vikings?
Yeah, that's so tough. Because on the one hand, for the positives that really would make him a strong hire, I think he's number one. But
Hmm.
I also feel like he's so polarizing, where this could end up in a flaming disaster that I'd almost rather start fresh with somebody who maybe has never coached before, like a Kevin O'Connell or something, or maybe Raheem Morris, who
Yeah.
NFL players right now respect a great deal and will get on the table and scream it to the mountaintops, because you got a guy like Jalen Ramsey who's got as much cred in the league as anybody, I think, and
Yeah.
he's a big fan of Morris. So there's that, and so it's like where do I want to go with this?
Hmm.
I think Harbaugh would bring a lot more pizzazz, bring a lot more flair, a lot more buzz. But at the same time, is that really going to translate into a championship? I don't really know if that's the case. And maybe a guy like O'Connell coming from a Ram system that I really love, that obviously they're doing something right there because they make the playoffs every year. They're always in contention. They're about to play for a Super Bowl tomorrow,
Yep.
and it's like I kind of want to see what's really cooking out there, and get that in our own building and maybe turn ourselves into a winner. Because even on the other side in the AFC, you got Zach Taylor, who's the quarterbacks coach there in
Yep.
LA, and now he's flourishing. Obviously, they have Joe Burrow, and it helps get the number one pick. But still, I kind of want some of that. So it's like, would it be better to get a younger coach in general too? Because like we mentioned, Harbaugh's 58, so it's like O'Connell worth looking at just because he feels like maybe a feels like we're reinventing the wheel as far as this organization goes. Feels like we've been living in the past for how long? Maybe now it's time to jump into the future. So I'd say Harbaugh, right in this very moment, probably ranks in third. I would say. I think he ranks
Okay.
behind both Rams guys for me, but he's not far behind. How about
Okay.
you? What are you thinking?
I would agree with you. I think he's behind both the Rams guys. The more that's talked about Kevin O'Connell, the more intriguing he becomes to me.
Yeah.
I'd say Raheem Morris is still probably my top choice. Just, like you said, based on the respect that he's garnered from players, all the stuff that's come out with, Tomlin and stuff supporting Raheem Morris as well. So I think all that's, super encouraging. And I think he'd be a fantastic leader. That's the thing about Harbaugh. Like, I don't know if he'd be the best leader. Obviously he's got the personality and he's demanding of his players and stuff like that. But like you mentioned, I don't know how well it'd be received. And I think this has extreme boom or bust potential. Like, it could be a really good thing or it could be a really horrible thing. And the problem is if it blows up, it's probably going to screw the new GM over, Adolfo Mensa. So obviously he's got to be smart with this too. And whoever he picks, he's going to trust. But I feel like you'd have a little more leeway if you had a guy like, Kevin O'Connell, who just, he doesn't have the experience, but, you maybe get a little slack with that. So it's interesting. They're in quite the predicament here, but I mean, at least the encouraging thing is that this is an attractive job and there's a lot of coaches that are interested in this job. We've already interviewed 9 candidates and Harbaugh will be the 10th if he's interviewed already or once this interview happens. So we'll have people to pick from, I think, but it's just going to be interesting to see what direction they go,
Yeah, exactly, man. I don't know. This feels like a Wilf ownership Vikings type move, just because they're not afraid to make a splash. They do all these things like bringing in Favre in 2009 and signing Kirk to this fully guaranteed contract back in 2018 because we feel like we're a piece away from getting to the Super Bowl. And then you think about even something as small or what seems as small as signing Patrick Peterson last year. Like, how fun is Patrick Peterson? How big of a name brand has he been in the NFL for the past decade? So it's like they're not afraid to make these really headline moves. So I could definitely see this happening. It's just it's really hard to know how far along this is or not, like how realistic it is or not. That maybe they're just having him in to hear what he has to say, and they really have to be wowed to give him a chance, because there's so many other things that they'd have to do to just get him to be our head coach, even if he wants to be, because you're thinking you're already paying Zim and Rick, for that matter, a ton of buyout money because they were under contract through 2023. And then you think about paying Harbaugh's salary just to be the coach here. And then you got to pay extra buyout money to the University of Michigan for every year left on his contract, which runs for another couple of years or something like that. So that there's a lot of money involved there. So like, how committed to Harbaugh are you, and how much do you really think he can win a championship here? I think that would say a lot if they are willing to go all those extra miles to make it happen here, make him the head coach. That's how much belief they would have in him and how realistic they think it is to win a championship here.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely would be a Wilf type move, but well, it'll be interesting to see if they actually go through with this or not. And I'm really hoping that within this next week here, I mean, there will be 2 Super Bowl teams at the end of the day, Sunday. And, then we'll have pretty much all the coaching options on the table. So I would hope by, the end of this upcoming week here, we can, actually know who our head coach is going to be and get that put behind us and then kind of go forward with what we're going to do with this roster. So definitely is going to be interesting, but it's always fun when the Vikings are in contention for a name like this. And whether it's a player or a coach, apparently it's just the Vikings are always intriguing and they're always in it, which, I mean, you can't fault them for that. At least they're entertaining when it comes to that sort of stuff. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. So that's going to do it for this edition of the North Star Takes podcast. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're a Vikings fan or Minnesota sports fan, please hit the like button on this video and give us a subscribe as well. Feel free to follow us on both Twitter and Instagram and leave your comments below. What are your thoughts on Jim Harbaugh? Do you think he can succeed here? Do you think he's too much boom or bust potential? Let us know what you think about Harbaugh. And until next time, thanks for watching.